In the grand marble halls of Greenridge Courthouse, a seasoned black legal advisor expects nothing more than a routine errand. But his day takes a sharp turn when he steps in to defend a terrified teenager from the harsh grip of a cop with a reputation for unchecked power. What begins as a simple act of courage spirals into a tense courtroom showdown where accusations fly and secrets unravel. Marcus Reynolds wiped the sweat from his brow as he stepped out of the pharmacy, clutching a paper bag filled with medications. The late afternoon sun bore down mercilessly, turning the air thick and oppressive. He glanced at his watch, 3:45 p.m. There was still plenty of time to drop off the forms at the courthouse before closing. Adjusting the strap of his worn leather briefcase, Marcus started down the sidewalk toward Greenridge Courthouse, its towering columns already visible above the line of sycamore trees that shaded Main Street. The courthouse was an imposing structure of white stone and polished glass, a symbol of law and order in this otherwise quiet town. But to Marcus, it had always felt like a fortress, one that seemed built as much to keep certain people out as it was to uphold justice. Even after decades of working within the system, he couldn't shake the weight of that reality. His mind wandered to the cases he had fought over the years: civil rights violations, workplace discrimination, police misconduct. Some had been victories, others bitter defeats. Now, semi-retired, he served as a legal advisor for the district, mentoring young attorneys and overseeing special cases. Yet, even as he slowed down, Marcus couldn't turn away from injustice. It was woven into the fabric of his life. The sharp sound of a woman's voice jolted him from his thoughts. Help. Oh, please, someone help. Marcus turned sharply toward the sound. Across the street, in the parking lot behind a small grocery store, an elderly woman stood near a row of parked cars, her hands trembling as she patted her pockets and frantically searched the ground. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Marcus called as he hurried toward her, his briefcase swinging at his side. She looked up, her lined face etched with panic. "My wallet. I can't find it. She broke off, her voice catching as tears welled in her eyes. Marcus didn't hesitate. Setting his briefcase down, he scanned the asphalt, moving slowly around the cars. The heat radiating from the pavement made the air shimmer, but Marcus focused. Years of observing crime scenes had taught him to look for details others missed. Here. He bent down and pulled a worn leather billfold from beneath a crumpled newspaper near the front tire of a faded blue sedan. "Is this it?" The woman gasped and rushed to him, taking the wallet with both hands as if it might vanish. "Oh, bless you. Yes, this is it." She clutched it to her chest. "Thank you so much. You have no idea," I thought. Marcus smiled, holding up a hand to stop her. "It's all right. Anyone else would have done the same." But even as he said it, Marcus knew that wasn't entirely true. Over the years, he'd seen far too many people turn a blind eye to someone in need. That wasn't how he'd been raised. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently. The woman nodded quickly, though her hand still shook. Yes, I'll be fine now. Thank you again." She patted his arm as if to reassure him, then hurried toward her car. Marcus watched her go, a flicker of satisfaction warming his chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. With that, he grabbed his briefcase and resumed his path toward the courthouse. As he climbed the marble steps, Marcus's gaze swept the plaza out front. The place bustled with activity: lawyers in tailored suits, clerks balancing stacks of folders, and citizens milling about. But his attention caught on something that made his steps falter. Near the entrance, a tall, broad-shouldered police officer was looming over a young black teenager. The boy, no older than 17, stood rigid, his eyes darting nervously as the officer's voice thundered above the crowd. A common story with black people like Marcus. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" The officer jabbed a finger in the boy's face. "This building isn't a hangout. Move along, or I'll make sure you do." The teenager muttered something inaudible, but the officer stepped closer, his posture menacing. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He recognized the nameplate pinned to the officer's chest: Whitmore. Logan Whitmore. The man had a reputation, a bad one. Marcus had heard the complaints over the years, whispered in hallways and detailed in case files that never made it to court. Excessive force, intimidation, racial profiling. But Whitmore had friends in the right places, and no case against him had ever stuck. Marcus approached carefully, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, officer. Is there a problem here?" Whitmore turned, his expression twisting into a sneer. "This doesn't concern you, old man." Marcus held his ground. "It does if you're harassing someone who's done nothing wrong." The officer's eyes narrowed, and his grip tightened on the boy's sleeve. "You people are always defending the wrong crowd," he spat. Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest. Decades of seeing that same contempt, that same abuse of power, threatened to boil over. But he steadied himself. Losing control wouldn't help the boy standing frozen with fear. "He's not doing anything wrong," Marcus said, his voice even. "And you know it." The boy seized the opening, yanking his arm free and bolting into the crowd. Whitmore whirled, but it was too late. The teenager had vanished. Furious, the officer turned back to Marcus. "You just made a big mistake." Before Marcus could react, Whitmore grabbed his arm, his grip like iron. "You want to interfere? Fine. You can explain yourself inside." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people shouted protests, while others froze, too stunned to act. Marcus's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I have nothing to hide," he said quietly, letting Whitmore drag him through the heavy courthouse doors. The murmurs followed them inside, echoing off the marble walls. But Marcus didn't let fear take hold. He'd faced worse than this before, and as the weight of the situation pressed down on him, one thought kept repeating in his mind. "Not this time. This time the truth will come out." Marcus Reynolds kept his head high as Officer Whitmore marched him through the grand marble-floored lobby of the Greenridge Courthouse. The echoes of their footsteps bounced off the high ceilings, amplifying the heavy tension that followed them like a shadow. Marcus felt the eyes of clerks, lawyers, and security guards settling on him, some wide with disbelief, others averting their gaze, unwilling to get involved. Whitmore's grip on Marcus's arm was unrelenting, his fingers digging into the fabric of Marcus's blazer. "You'll regret this," the officer hissed under his breath, his voice low but sharp enough to pierce through the growing whispers of the crowd. Marcus remained silent. He had no intention of giving Whitmore the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. Instead, he took in his surroundings, noting the faces of those watching. Some were familiar local attorneys he'd worked with, courthouse staff who knew his reputation. A few locked eyes with him, their brows furrowed in silent disapproval of what they were witnessing. Others quickly turned away, their fear of confrontation louder than their sense of justice. "Move it," Whitmore snapped, shoving Marcus toward a side corridor. Marcus stumbled slightly but caught himself, straightening his posture. "You're making a mistake," he said evenly, not out of desperation but as a statement of fact. Whitmore smirked. "The only mistake here is thinking you're above the law." Marcus didn't respond. He knew the game Whitmore was playing: dominate, intimidate, and control. He'd seen it before, countless times. The key was not to give in. They reached a small hearing room tucked away at the end of the hall. Whitmore flung the door open and pushed Marcus inside. The room was sparsely furnished: just a table, a few chairs, and a desk at the front for the clerk. Despite its size, it felt suffocating, the tension pressing in from the walls. Already seated at the clerk's desk was Sarah Green, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s. Marcus recognized her immediately. She'd worked in the courthouse for over 2 decades and had a reputation for being meticulous and fair, though he also knew she was bound by the limits of her role. She glanced up as they entered, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Marcus. "Officer Whitmore," she began, her tone measured. "What's going on here?" "Obstruction," Whitmore snapped. "Interfering with a police investigation, disturbing the peace," and he paused for dramatic effect. "Attempted assault on an officer." Sarah blinked. "Attempted assault." Her voice carried a faint edge of skepticism. "That's right." Whitmore squared his shoulders as if daring her to question him further. Marcus took a slow breath. "This is ridiculous, Sarah, and you know it." The clerk's lips tightened, but she quickly looked down at the papers in front of her. "I'm required to record the charges," she said softly, though her eyes flickered with something close to sympathy. "Then let's get on with it," Whitmore said, crossing his arms and leaning against the table like a man already convinced of his victory. Marcus stepped forward. "I'll represent myself," he said, his voice calm but resolute. No need to waste anyone else's time. Sarah's pen hovered above the paper, hesitation flashing across her face. Clearly she knew something about this situation didn't add up, but her job wasn't to argue, it was to document. She jotted down the charges, then looked back up at Marcus. "Do you understand the accusations against you?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "I do. And I reject every one of them." Whitmore scoffed. "You can reject whatever you want, old man. It won't change the facts." Marcus turned slowly, meeting the officer's gaze. "Facts? That's an interesting word coming from someone who just harassed a teenager outside a public courthouse." Whitmore's face darkened, but before he could respond, the door creaked open, and Judge Howard Benson stepped inside. Benson was in his early 60s, with thinning gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He moved with the deliberate authority of a man who'd spent decades behind the bench. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone brisk but curious. His gaze swept over Marcus before settling on Whitmore. Whitmore straightened. "Your Honor, we have a situation involving this man obstructing an ongoing investigation." "Investigation?" Benson raised an eyebrow. "In the courthouse lobby?" "Yes, sir," Whitmore replied quickly, clearly hoping to keep control of the narrative. "He interfered with my handling of a suspect and refused to comply with orders." Benson turned to Marcus. "And you, Mr. Reynolds?" Marcus clasped his hands behind his back. "I spoke up to prevent an abuse of power, Your Honor. That's all." Benson studied him for a moment before gesturing toward the table. "Sit down, both of you." Whitmore bristled at being addressed so bluntly but obeyed. Marcus took his seat, folding his hands neatly on the table. Benson flipped through the papers Sarah handed him. His expression shifted subtly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He set the documents down and leaned forward. "Officer Whitmore, I'm going to need you to be very specific," the judge said, his tone firm but even. "Walk me through what happened outside." Whitmore launched into his version of events, exaggerating every detail. He painted Marcus as an agitator, a man who had interfered with police work and escalated the situation. As he spoke, Marcus noted how the officer avoided eye contact with the judge, instead focusing on the crowd that had started to gather outside the hearing room's glass window. It was clear Whitmore was playing to the audience, hoping his badge and authority would carry more weight than the truth. When the officer finished, Benson leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He glanced at Marcus, then at Sarah. "And yet, no one else outside corroborates this, do they?" Whitmore stiffened. "We didn't have time to gather statements." A knock on the door cut him off. A courthouse official entered, carrying a slim folder. He crossed the room and handed it to Judge Benson, whispering something in his ear. Benson's eyes flickered with surprise, then narrowed. "We're going to take a brief recess," he announced, rapping his gavel lightly. 15 minutes. The murmurs in the room swelled as people speculated about the interruption. Marcus sat back, his heart steady but his mind racing. Something was happening behind the scenes, and whatever it was, it had just shifted the balance of power in the room. Judge Benson frowned, flipping through the folder. "This file was sent to my office," he said, glancing up at Sarah Green. "Apparently, Officer Whitmore has been the subject of multiple complaints that were buried until now." Sarah shifted uncomfortably but nodded. The reports came from several sources: citizens, fellow officers, and even internal audits. "It's not pretty." Marcus Reynolds remained seated as the murmurs in the room grew louder, like the low hum of an approaching storm. Whitmore paced near the prosecution table, his jaw tight and his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The tension in the air was palpable. Judge Benson had left the bench moments earlier, disappearing into his chambers with the slim folder handed to him by the courthouse official. The brief recess had only amplified the uncertainty hanging over the proceedings, and Marcus could feel the weight of the crowd's expectations pressing down on him. Whitmore finally broke the silence, his voice low but sharp as he leaned toward Marcus. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "I don't care what's in that file. People like you don't get the last word, not in my town." Marcus tilted his head slightly, regarding Whitmore with an expression of calm that only seemed to infuriate the officer further. "That's where you're wrong, Officer Whitmore," he replied evenly. "This isn't your town. It belongs to the people. All the people. Whitmore's face flushed red, but before he could respond, the door at the back of the room opened, and Judge Benson strode back in, his expression unreadable. The murmurs died down as he took his seat and tapped his gavel twice. "Court is back in session," Benson said firmly. He placed the folder on the desk in front of him, resting his hands on it as he fixed his gaze first on Whitmore and then on Marcus. "Officer Whitmore," the judge began, "before we proceed, I want to clarify a few points. You stated earlier that Mr. Reynolds interfered with an ongoing investigation. Do you still stand by that statement?" Whitmore straightened. "Absolutely, Your Honor." "And you also alleged that Mr. Reynolds attempted to assault you during the incident?" "Yes, Your Honor." Benson nodded slowly, then turned his attention to Marcus. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything you'd like to add before I address this matter further?" Marcus stood, his movements deliberate. He clasped his hands in front of him and spoke with a steady, measured tone. "Your Honor, I've dedicated my life to the pursuit of justice. I have represented victims of discrimination, advocated for fairness, and held those in power accountable for their actions. I do not take lightly the accusations leveled against me today, but I cannot and will not stand silent while my integrity is questioned and the truth is distorted." A ripple of movement passed through the spectators, and Whitmore's smirk faltered for the first time. Marcus reached into his jacket and slowly withdrew a gold badge, holding it up so the entire room could see. "My name is Marcus Reynolds," he said, letting the weight of his words fill the room, "and I am the senior legal advisor and civil rights investigator for this district and several others." Gasps erupted from the crowd, and even Sarah Green, the clerk, froze in her seat, her pen suspended mid-air. Whitmore's face drained of color. That's impossible," he stammered, taking a half-step back. Marcus didn't flinch. "I oversee investigations into abuses of power and violations of civil rights, including misconduct within law enforcement." He turned to face Whitmore directly. "I've seen officers like you before, men who think their badge is a license to bully, intimidate, and control, and I've spent my career making sure they're held accountable." Judge Benson held up a hand, signaling for silence as the room buzzed with whispers. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, "the file I received during the recess contains a detailed account of Officer Whitmore's disciplinary history. It also includes complaints filed against him for excessive force, racial profiling, and conduct unbecoming of an officer." Whitmore's mouth opened, but no words came out. Benson continued, his voice firm. "This court takes such matters very seriously. In light of this new information and your position, Mr. Reynolds, all charges against you are hereby dismissed." Applause broke out in the back of the room, quickly spreading until the entire gallery was filled with clapping and murmurs of support. Marcus remained steady, nodding once in acknowledgement but resisting the urge to show too much satisfaction. He knew this wasn't just about him, it was about something much larger. The judge wasn't finished. "As for you, Officer Whitmore," Benson said, leveling his gaze at the visibly shaken officer, "I am ordering an immediate internal investigation into your actions. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending the outcome of that investigation. Furthermore, I will personally be recommending that the district attorney review this matter for possible criminal charges." Whitmore staggered back as though the words had struck him physically. "You can't do this," he barked. "This is my job, my authority." "No," Benson said firmly. "Your authority ended the moment you abused it." Two courthouse bailiffs stepped forward. Whitmore froze, his eyes darting wildly before finally dropping to the floor. He didn't resist as they led him out, though his shoulders sagged under the weight of his humiliation. Marcus exhaled slowly as the tension in the room began to dissipate. He turned to Sarah Green, who met his gaze with an expression of quiet admiration. "Thank you for keeping things straight," he said softly. She offered a faint smile. "You didn't need my help, Mr. Reynolds, but you definitely gave this place something to talk about." Marcus allowed himself a small smile in return before turning to face the crowd. Among the faces, he spotted the teenager, Jamal, peering cautiously through the window of the hearing room. Marcus gave him a slight nod, and the boy's expression shifted from fear to hope. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but today, at least, justice had taken a stand. As Marcus collected his things and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, he felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This battle was won, but the fight for fairness was far from finished. And Marcus Reynolds, as weary as he sometimes felt, knew he was still ready to fight it. Marcus Reynolds stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the past hour still heavy on his shoulders despite the outcome. The sun hung lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. The crowd that had gathered inside was now spilling out onto the plaza, their voices a low hum of conversations and murmurs about what had just transpired. Marcus paused at the top of the steps, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. People were watching him, some with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with thinly veiled skepticism. He recognized the expressions immediately. It wasn't the first time he'd stood in this position victorious but scrutinized. A familiar voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Reynolds." Marcus turned to see Jamal, the teenager whose confrontation with Whitmore had sparked the entire ordeal. Jamal stood near the bottom of the steps, fidgeting with the straps of his backpack. His expression was uncertain, somewhere between gratitude and guilt. Marcus descended the steps slowly, his posture steady and deliberate. He knew the importance of composure, especially in moments like this. "You okay, son?" Marcus asked as he reached the young man. Jamal hesitated, then nodded. I guess so. I mean, yeah, thanks to you." Marcus offered a reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me. But next time someone tries to intimidate you, don't let them make you feel small." Jamal's eyes flickered with something that resembled shame. "I wanted to stand up to him," he admitted quietly, "but I didn't know what to do. I was scared." "Fear's not a weakness," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. "It's a signal. It means you recognize danger, and that's smart. But what matters is what you do after the fear." He placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Today you got out of there. That was the right move. Tomorrow, you stand a little taller, a little stronger." Jamal nodded again, this time with more conviction. "I will." Before Marcus could respond, Evelyn Moore, the elderly woman he had helped earlier, approached them, her small frame nearly swallowed by the oversized purse slung across her shoulder. "Mr. Reynolds," she said breathlessly, clutching his arm. "I saw what happened in there. That officer, he had no right to treat you that way." Marcus smiled gently. "No, he didn't." "But you," she shook her head, her voice trembling. "You stood up to him. Just like you stood up for me earlier. The world needs more people like you." Marcus nodded, but there was a weariness in his eyes. "The world needs more people willing to step in when it counts," he replied. "Not just people like me." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her gratitude evident, but Marcus could feel the exhaustion creeping in. Years of fighting these battles, big and small, had left their mark. Yet as he looked at Jamal and Evelyn, he knew he couldn't stop. He turned as the doors to the courthouse opened again, and Sarah Green emerged, clipboard in hand. She caught Marcus's eye and approached with purpose. "I thought you'd want to know," she began, lowering her voice. "They've already started the internal review on Whitmore. Judge Benson isn't wasting any time." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Good. Let's hope they do more than just review this time." Sarah hesitated. "They're also talking about filing formal charges against him, excessive force, civil rights violations." She paused, then added, "People are starting to talk about the cases he's been involved in, cases that might need reopening." Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. It was the outcome he'd hoped for, but he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Cases like these had a way of dredging up more than just facts. They exposed systemic cracks and forced uncomfortable conversations. "I'll keep an eye on it," Marcus said, his voice firm. "And I'll make sure this one doesn't get buried." Sarah nodded, then glanced toward Jamal. "He's lucky you were there," she said softly. Marcus shook his head. No one should have to rely on luck to be treated fairly. As Sarah walked away, Marcus turned back to Jamal. "You need someone to take you home?" Jamal shook his head. "Nah, I'll be all right." He hesitated before adding, "But maybe I could talk to you sometime. About, this kind of stuff." Marcus studied him for a moment, recognizing the tentative hope in the boy's voice, the hope of someone who had seen injustice and wanted to fight it but didn't know how. "Anytime," Marcus said. You've got my number now. Don't be afraid to use it." Jamal grinned, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him, and took off toward the bus stop. Marcus lingered for a moment longer, looking up at the courthouse that had so often been a battleground. The towering column seemed less imposing now, softened by the evening light. He thought of Whitmore angry, broken, and dragged away in handcuffs, and of the system that had protected men like him for far too long. Today had been a victory, but Marcus knew better than to mistake it for a resolution. The fight for justice was never over. It shifted and evolved, taking new forms and presenting new challenges. But as Marcus walked away from the courthouse steps, he carried something else with him, a quiet determination. Because as long as there were people like Jamal who needed someone to show them the way, Marcus Reynolds would keep showing up. He adjusted his briefcase and started down the street, the echoes of applause from earlier still lingering in the air like distant thunder. Somewhere behind him, the courthouse loomed, but Marcus wasn't looking back. There was still work to do.